Well, I'm extremely honored to introduce my sister. We just found out that tonight that, in fact, we might be related. My mother and my mother comes from the same reserve she comes from, and apparently her mother, and my mother are both have the same last name, Whitefish. Famous family from that reserve. But anyway, tonight we're very proud and honored to have Sylvia give us a history of Treaty 6. Sylvia McAdam is from the Treaty 6 lands and is a direct descendant of Treaty people. She is Nihio Cree and Makoi, it's Ojibwe, and speaks fluently in Nihio Cree. Sylvia has her Juris Doctorate from the University of Saskatchewan and a Human Justice degree from the University of Saskatchewan Regina campus. She is one of 4 first organizers of a global grassroots movement called Idle No More in protection of indigenous sovereignty, treaties, land, and water. She has been selected for several awards, namely the Carol Giller Human Rights Award, Foreign Policy Magazine Top 100 Global Thinkers Award, Social Justice and 2014 Global Citizens Award. And Sylvia is also the author of several books, including Nationhood Interrupted and Revitalizing Nihio Legal System. So now, please, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my sister, Sylvia McAdam.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
So I can put this microphone down, right? Okay. Can I? Is this microphone working? Okay. That means I can walk around. I don't like podiums, so I'm gonna be walking around because I'm a very animated speaker. I'm gonna be swinging my arms and I'm gonna be walking down the meadow with all of you. So, Treaty 6. In the language, in my people's language, it's called Kihte Asutamatun Ngotosik. Treaty 6. I am a direct descendant. I can go to that treaty book and I can put my finger on the name of my great-great-grandfather, Saisiwiham, who took treaty. Now, there's something unique about my family, and I'm not saying that we're not affected by colonization. We absolutely are. Every one of us are. But there's something unique about my family that I found out eventually as I went out in the world, right? I went out to university and started learning something unique. It was called a residential school. Never heard of it. Didn't even know about it. And then I asked my parents, and then a story unfolded. Kuskatape Eva. This is my granddaughter. And so what happened is, when the Indian agent and the priest came for the children, certain families took 1 or 2 children and they hid them away. Families did that. There were certain families that did that. My dad happened to be one of them. His dad, my grandfather, Nimosum, took him out to the land into our hunting territories. Same with my mother. her dad took her into the hunting lands of my people and was raised there. This is how come today, Kakipik squat no, I can speak to you in my people's language, because my great-grandmother didn't go to residential school. My grandmother didn't. My mother didn't. And I didn't. Isn't that incredible? So today, I'm in a position where I have Indigenous knowledge passed through the generations of women. My great-grandmother was, Ava, can you turn that down, please? Turn it down. Turn it down. And there's a group of women that are very unique to Treaty 6, and they're called Okititau Skoak. And it happens, and if you read my book and if you buy it, there's a picture of her, my great-grandmother, who never went to residential school. She is an Okititau. It is said that she is the last of our region to have seen and witnessed when the women raised up the lodges at the time of treaty making. They gathered together. The women gathered together, and they said they knew that the land was changing. How many of you here speak the language? Nihio. I'm going to quickly say it in Nihio, and then I'll translate into English. Yagungo isko igima montotig inakskatotig ikski tahkig iwimiskotsipaini kaski igikski tah gima montotig iginagatahkig igotahane in the treaties asutamatu nanta inagatahkig uksiwatsunoao Igok, isohkastatig, igok, ikuitapuitig, igok, imamahtaunig, uksiwatsunoau, ikaskihtatig, wa hioti itaptig, inagatamaosotig, miugigoi matsun. Those women were so sacred and gifted. They had the ability to take their compassion, their sacred compassion, and they put it into the treaties. And they left treaty terms and promises to sustain the generations to come. And it's those women that I write about, and I carry a tiny bit of knowledge here today. And I'm so grateful to be standing here with all of you to share this knowledge. And the elders say, it's not a coincidence that you're here. You're meant to hear this information. It's not a coincidence. Uchito, you're meant to hear it. And at the time of treaty making, these women gathered because we already heard what was happening in Treaty 1, 2, and 3. And 4 and 5. We already heard, and they knew the land was going to change. There are certain things that they left in the treaties. So they raised up their lodges, these women. And this is where I really struggle and have a hard time when I hear the men say, women do not touch the drum. I have a hard time with that. And when they say, the women don't touch the rattles, I have a hard time with that. Because my great-grandmother, who was an Ogichitao, was there at the time when they raised up the lodges for the treaty making. And it was only women that were there. Only women. And it was the shape of our most sacred lodge, and it is called the Sundance. It was that similar shape. And it was all women who gathered the trees, who started the fire, who sang the drums, who sang the songs, brought in the pipe. It was all women. And when I was growing up, I was one of those kids that used to sit under the table. Because the adult conversations were so much more interesting. And I have a very, very acute memory. And I remember when my grandmother would talk about stories, and it was just as if the way she would talk in a language, it was like she took me back. It took me back, and I walked on those lands. Today, I go with my mother. We take our tobacco, and I go to the land where those women last met. And I sit on that land and I offer my tobacco. It was during that time, I was writing a chapter on my book about land. And I had these little fuzzy memories about the land, and I thought, I gotta go home. How can I write about land when I have only fuzzy memories, right? By this time, I was finishing up my law school, and I was nicely gonna go into the colonizer system and practice law, right? I had plans. Well, my plans got interrupted, and I went home. I threw my things in storage, and I headed home. I went back to the lands. And when I went back there, you don't just go back to the land. You don't just like, oh yeah, walk in there. You walk in there with your mind, with your spirit, with your emotions, with the mental. Because there's four things that we're born with, that we bring, the Creator gives us at the time of our human birth. And that's mental, spiritual, physical, and emotional. And when I went back to the land, all of these things were impacted. And I talk about that in my book in chapter 6. And you know how when you're falling in love, right? All of it. Who's fallen in love here, right? At one time or other, we've gone through that. We've fallen in love, right? Right? We've done that. And being a lawyer, law teaches you don't talk about love. You don't talk about it. You don't even use it in the same sentence. The law takes that out of you. So here I was going back into the land, and I was falling in love. That's the only way I could describe it. And I would fall asleep out there. I would just drive into any road, and I would go fall asleep in there. Don't do that, by the way. Don't do that. Bambi does not live out there. I learned that kind of the hard way when a cougar, the four-legged kind, circled my tent. So I learned things while I was out there. It was ancient knowledge that was revitalized. So I was out there, and I had the most profound dreams. And I found old hunting cabins. It was like the hunters were gonna come back tomorrow. Like their traps, everything were still there. And I would fall asleep. It was beautiful. My people's lands are beautiful, extraordinarily beautiful. So I would end up there. I was a tree hugger for a while. And I loved it. I loved it. But part of that going back, I started to see the destruction. There was clear cutting going on in violation of treaty. Where are we going to hunt if they take all of the trees, right? And I was dragging my parents around. I took my dad with me to our hunting lands, and I said, Papa, no tawi, where is the cabin? What happened to our cabin? And my dad said, well, come on, I'll show you. We'll go there. And this is a cabin that I remember from my childhood. And my mother used to swing us by these 2 trees, right? And we went there. And my dad took me over there, and he said, there it is. And it was this big black burn mark on the ground. And I asked him what happened. And he said, Saskatchewan Environment burnt it down. Being a lawyer, of course, I'm like, what? So that what took me to the offices of Saskatchewan Environment, which I'm still going there and asking questions. I'm not satisfied with the answers. But in the middle of all of this, I'm grieving because they're taking the trees out in it, almost like a frenzy out there. They're taking our trees. So I asked them, who gave you consent? And I found out who, but I won't talk about that here. In the middle of that, in the middle of it, somebody tagged me on Facebook. And I'm not paying attention. I'm in love, right? I'm in love, I'm not paying attention. But something, and this is the spiritual part of us that we have to pay attention. I suggest to you, when you feel that pull, listen to it. Because I did. That time I felt this pull to go back and look at it. And I did. I went back into Facebook and I looked at it. Here it was Bill C-45. So I don't think we were expected to read it, 400 pages, right? But I took out my Black Law Dictionary and I started reading it. I was blown away. How can anybody put through an omnibus budget bill that was going to change our treaty lands? People forget that our reserved lands, the posted size stamps, are treaty lands. They are treaty. And it was going to change those very things. It was going to remove, and it did remove, the protection of water. And if you know anything about Indigenous women, we believe that we have jurisdiction over land and water. And I knew that. The women carry the water ceremonies. And by this time, I was going through so much grief, seeing the trees being hauled away and our water being impacted. And I'm not into cliches, I'm not. But now I understand, that day, I understand what it meant to draw a line. Because I drew a line right across my people's lands. And I said, I can't do this. Can't do it. I can't do it. So I started talking to people. Now I was posting all over Facebook, and I said, do you guys know what this is going to do? And then Nina and Jessica contacted me and said, we have an idea what it's going to do. And then they pulled me into this chat. We don't know each other, by the way. We don't know each other at all. And our only communication was through Facebook. And we started talking, and then I said, in the common law, there's something called acquiesce. Anybody ever heard of that? Acquiesce? Acquiesce means your silence is consent. It doesn't work in situations where there's violence and where children are involved. It doesn't work. It works in places like us in this room, reasonable-minded people. If there's a law being passed and you're silent about it, that is considered your consent. So I knew that, and I told the other ladies, and I said, we can't be silent. We have to do something. Even if we have to stand in some corner giving out pamphlets, we have to do something. Thank goodness we didn't have to stand in a corner. If you know anything about Saskatoon, it's very racist. It wouldn't have been a good situation. So we had a teach-in on November 10th. And then it grew. We got invited to go to Regina, and then North Battleford, and then Prince Albert. And off I went. I took off to Edmonton over here, and then we got invited to go speak in Louisville. And before we did that teaching in Louisville, I met with some elders. The night before, I sat with some elders. Ava, can you turn that down? Turn it down. Thank you. And then the elders told me, you cannot use the colonizers' laws. What? You can't do that. So I sat there and I asked them, well, what do we do? I knew by this time that something incredible was unfolding because you could sense it in the air. And then they said, what you're going to do is you are going to utilize, you are going to raise our most sacred law. You're going to use it because it's used in times of threat and crisis. And I said, okay, tapoy. And they said to me, you are going to use na tamawasuin. Na tamawasuin means that you are going to defend and protect for the children. 7 generations. Na tamawasuin. But not only are you going to defend and protect for your children, you are going to defend and protect for the world's children. And I said, even Stephen Harper? And they said, yes, even his children. And I said, well, I don't have an issue with that, but we'll do it. And then they said, but not only the human children, you are going to defend and protect the children of the bears, the plants, the deer, the winged, the four-legged, the crawlers, the swimmers, the flyers, all of their children, the trees, the rivers, all of them. I didn't understand it at the time. I didn't. It took me a little bit of time, but now I understand it. So with that, the next day, when we ended up in Louisville, that's what we did. That was the commitment that I still hold today. That's the commitment I still stand with. For the women here, when you stand, when you bury your feet deep in the ground of our people's lands, nothing can move you. You become unshakable, especially na tamawasuin. See, that's how powerful our laws are. So here we are, in the middle of just like all over the world, we're being contacted from all over the world. And there's a few stories that I get to hear about because, we're in the inside, right? And one of those stories, I was driving along, I was going from community to community, trying to reach as many of the grassroots people. And that time, when we were reaching out to people, we were sitting there, we're like, how are we going to reach them? And we're like, well, let's reach the grassroots people. Let's reach out to them. So we did. We reached out to them. But for some reason, it wasn't like we excluded the men. But for some reason, it was the poorest women that came forward. And so we started working with them. Next thing you know, there's thousands of us walking, thousands. In Ottawa, in Edmonton here, I was here walking with people in Edmonton. What an incredible feeling. Beautiful. Never imagined in my lifetime that I'd be walking with thousands of people, all manner of people, not just Indigenous people, not just the Indians, but all manner of people who understood that we all need water. It is a privilege today for me to stand here to speak to all of you. It's a privilege to talk about treaty. It's an incredible privilege because right now in other parts of the world, their dialogue is not about treaties. It's not about nationhood or self-determination. Their dialogue is, how are we going to achieve peace in a war-torn countries who are beginning to fight over water? Right? So we're incredibly fortunate here. And every day I'm grateful for that. I'm very grateful for it. And treaties have a role in it. They have a role. But most importantly, all of us here want peace. We want justice. We want freedom. We want liberation. Because my people right now do not have freedom. We do not have liberation. Are you wondering why I'm saying that? I'll tell you why. Every day that I wake up, I have to live under the Indian Act. I have to live in an imposed system, a structure of leadership that is not ours. I have to live with the very fact that the doctrine of Christian discovery has title over my people's lands. The very fact that we have to go to court to say that these lands are ours is problematic. They call it the underlying title of the crown, and if you go to law school and if you read any of the cases, that's a fancy way of saying it's the doctrine of discovery. So when people tell you that that doctrine is historical and has no relevance here, you tell them that every time that we've gone to court, the colonizer uses that document to assert jurisdiction over our lands. Every time a license is issued for exploitation, exploration into our lands, the clear cutting, that's from the doctrine of discovery. Make no mistake on that. And if you need further proof, go and read certain books There's a new DVD called The Doctrine of Discovery, Unmasking the Domination Code by Stephen Newcomb. He has extensive research on that. Now, how does that apply here? And why am I talking about it? Because at the time of treaty, Indigenous people lived in vibrant, structured, independent, free, self-determining societies. And at the time of European contact, we were called barbarians, savage, not human. And because we were not human, we became wards of this colonial state. We became wards, and we are still wards of that colonial state. This is how come I am not free. My grandchildren are not free. And I hope that in my lifetime, that my people will have freedom and liberation. And how that's going to look, I hope that it'll be the women who will be the driving force behind that. No freedom has ever been handed to anyone. We have to pressure the government to do it. And we're going to do it peacefully. You know why? We're going to do it peacefully because our children, our grandchildren, are witnessing our resistance. They're witnessing our need for freedom. And our elders are present. Their safety is a priority. And we'll do it. It will happen. Because the world is beginning to recognize that colonization is against world peace. I'll say it again. Colonization is against world peace. All over the world, we are seeing people acquiring freedom and dismantling and abolishing the colonization of their lands. I hear people say, let's decolonize, let's decolonize. And our people were so into thinking that decolonization needs to only happen with us. We always take responsibility. But it's not only just that. You look at the concepts in the United Nations. Decolonization means that you're going to give back the land and the resources. How is that going to look like? Because we're not going to send them back in the boats, right? What is that going to look like? Reparation, compensation, justice. Because as long as I am alive, to my last breath, I want freedom. I want freedom for the lands. Because even as I am held bound by that Indian Act and by the Doctrine of Discovery, my humanity, it's tied into that Doctrine of Discovery. My grandchildren are being trained today to take over this work. If I don't see that change in my lifetime, my daughters and my granddaughters will be here to continue that work. And it has to happen. Part of Idle No More, we're saying that our laws are just as powerful and beautiful. They have a right to flourish. Our laws existed at the time of treaty making. They existed. We are not a lawless people. Do not believe for a second that we are a lawless people. It's the first time our elders have allowed our laws to be written down. And it's in my book. Pastahuin, pastamuin, uchiniuin, uchinimuin. Complicated, complex, beautiful, thriving, life-giving laws. They need to be brought back. We need to bring them back. If we do not, all over the world, countries can withstand, nations can withstand poverty, displacement, war. But once you begin to forget, once you begin to lose a sense of yourself, when you begin to lose your identity, then you don't have long for this world. There are 3 things in the United Nations. And when I went there, and I went to speak to those nations, it's intimidating. It's intimidating, is standing in front of all these nations, you know, on TV, how they have the nations, right? It's exactly like that. And if you look into the ceiling of the United Nations, they painted the universe on there. So here I am. I just came from the reserve, and here I am in Geneva, Switzerland, talking in front of this group and looking up at the ceiling. And the first thing I said was, Niu manihio, kia tsumi taguyak, muya toinimisti hunang. What I said was, I am Cree, and we are still here. They haven't killed us off. Make no mistake, the intention of the policies and the laws that were enacted, I'm not supposed to be here. Indigenous people were supposed to ride off into the sunset to die. And those are not my words. I'm a researcher. I've come across so many documents that have stated that. And one of them, the driving force behind that is the Indian residential schools, right? We have mass graves all over Saskatchewan of children buried. And that's the kind of history that we need to keep reminding non-Indigenous people. Reminding non-Indigenous people they're benefiting from our resources and our lands through the theft and dispossession of Indigenous people through the Doctrine of Discovery. And if there's anything that you get out of my talk tonight, I want you all, if you go to church, get the Vatican to abolish the Doctrine of Discovery. Because that piece of document has done more damage all over the world, but especially here. And it's still alive and well every time we go to court. Every time the Métis go to court, they're faced with that. So what would that mean if it's abolished? Will we then see a society that's just and peaceful? I hope. There's something, and I'm going to backpedal a little bit. The women, the Okichitauskog, they left something in the treaty. And I'm going to talk about that because I don't hear enough people talking about it. Bimatihuin. Bimatihuin is livelihood. They knew the land was changing. Iwimiskutsupaikaski. They knew the land was changing. And I'm going to quote from the treaty book because I've researched it so much. I can almost even tell you which page it is. And it says in there, 1 square mile per family of 5. I have 7 children, 8 with myself. Because I meet the criteria of a family of 5 more or less, I am entitled per treaty term and promise to 1 square mile. 1 square mile. Can you imagine what I could do with that? I would love to have that. That's a treaty term and promise. And with that treaty term and promise, I'm supposed to have agricultural assistance. Can you imagine the generations of indigenous people, the original peoples, the economic benefits that have been withheld because of that violation to treaty? So now you take a look at the poverty that's happening all over for the original peoples. That's not supposed to happen. But because so many indigenous people were wiped out, and I have documents that say 90% of indigenous people were wiped out. 90%. Many of our lands stood widowed. People forgot about this. People forgot about it. In my time, I used to hear elders say, this land is supposed to grow. And I used to wonder, how is it supposed to grow? Many of those elders have made their journey. They've made their journey, still talking about that land. When I went to law school, I found out. And that's what I'm talking to you about, that 1 square mile. We are not supposed to live in poverty. Absolutely not. I could think of a lot of things I could do with my 1 square mile, with my grandchildren in tow. And I want that. Again, I hope in my lifetime, that treaty term and promise will be fulfilled. The treaties are unfinished business. They are not cede and surrender. They are peace and friendship. They are never cede and surrender. The women would never have done that. They never would have done that. They have jurisdiction over land and water. They never would have ceded and surrendered. This is the unfinished business of the Treaty 6 descendants of these lands. These lands are beautiful, and there's enough for everyone. So, where does that leave us? We're all sitting here. Non-Indigenous people have benefited. What is your moral and ethical responsibility when you walk out of here? Because this information has been hidden from history, yet it's right there in the treaty document if someone were to go and read it. It's right there. I did. I used to wonder why Treaty 6 was mapped out the way it is. And I found out why it's mapped out the way it is. So today, I keep researching, I keep asking questions. Why the Doctrine of Discovery? Why the underlying title of the Crown? every law that we are encountering is based on the doctrine of discovery, and that has to be abolished. We're seeing it not only impacting us, but we're seeing it in the tar sands that are affecting the world. 90% of the ocean's large fish are gone. 90%. And the only reason why I have that information is because of Idle No More, and I get to meet really incredible people. But if you want to read that information, go and access a book called Green Resistance. That's where I read it. That's where that information is. Every day we are hearing that animals are going extinct. Alberta is experiencing acid rain because of the tar sands. Animals are dying of cancer. My people are really struggling to eat the food from the land now. Things are getting contaminated. We're pushing the earth to an edge, a threshold where there's no return. So whose responsibility is it? Whose is it? Is it the government? Is it us? Every time we hear about economic development, I'm not against that. But it's the way that development is unfolding on the lands, the clear cutting, the way the trees are being taken is an issue. Because they not only log, they use a method called clear cutting, which wipes everything. They take everything. There's ways to take the trees. It's called selective logging, and it's environmentally sustainable. It leaves things behind so that the animals can live and thrive. There are ways that we can do this without harming the 7 generations. Because right now, the scientists are saying that we have about 20 years. A significant thing happened back in February. We hit a very alarming increase in the Earth's heat. It increased by 2 degrees. And we're not supposed to hit that 2 degrees, but we did. So, I hope that all of you will research the Doctrine of Discovery, because I'm going to work really, really hard to get that abolished. It's affecting not only Indigenous people, but non-Indigenous people. Go find out why you pay land tax. It's that feudal system that's been reinvented and unfolded here. Right? The feudal system, that's how come you pay the taxes to your lord. Okay? So that's the homework I'll leave with you. Research the Doctrine of Discovery. Get that DVD called Doctrine of Discovery, Unmasking the Domination Code by Stephen Newcomb. Get that DVD if possible. Now, I'm going to start wrapping up because I would like to hear questions from any one of you here. And give me your thoughts on what I've shared here. I want to thank the Creator and the 4 directions and our Mother Earth. I want to thank the Elder for the prayer. Thank you for the women that are here. All of the women. When we took treaty, you became our relatives. Our laws apply to you as well. Not the Maoist one to defend all of our children, right? So, hi, Kinaskum no, minaksimantu kasoim guau, katigiwi ganotsungagis katipskag uma kasoim gus no. Hey, hey.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Sister. Boy, that's a lot of information to think about. And yes, no wonder you got an award for thinker. What's it? The 100th Global Thinkers Award. Well, wow. So, as Sylvia has said, are there any questions out there that you wish to?
I just wanted to maybe ask Sylvia if you could explain a little bit. I've heard you speak before about the time of treaty signing, how the women were excluded but found a way to still speak to what was happening in the process.
Yep. Yep.
Please.
Okay. Okay. Put your tinfoil hats on. Okay, the question is how the women were excluded at the time of treaty and how were they involved, right? Now, if you read the treaty document, the men would say, we got to take a break. It says right in the treaty document, it's like, we got to take a break. And when they took a break, they would go back to the women and say, hey, this is what's going on. And the women would say, don't you dare cede and surrender. You can't speak about the land. That's what the women told them. You can share it, because we adopted them, we can share it. But you can't cede it, you can't give it away. And if you hear it, like if you read the treaty document, they keep asking, you know, we want to share this. We're not selling this. You understand this. We're not giving you the land. They were very clear all over the treaty document, all over. So when they took a pause, they would go over to the women. They would speak with them. And you can even, you see it in the treaty document. They would take breaks, and they would request a break. Yep.
Could you tell us the name of your company?
Okay. Actually, there's two books. The first one is called Cultural Teachings, First Nations Protocols and Methodologies. I like long titles. And the second one is called Nationhood Interrupted, Revitalizing Nihio-Legal Systems. And right now, it's the only book that speaks about Nihio laws.
We have a second mic, so if you can wait till I get to you. So I'll start here because I don't know.
Put the lights on, please. Claudia, can you put the lights on, please?
I want to say first, thank you very much. This has been very inspiring and moving, and so thank you very much for your presentation. I want to, could you please say a little bit more about the Doctrine of Discovery, because I'm not familiar with it. Could you just explain a little bit about what the fundamental meaning of that is?
About the early 1450s, from the imagination of the Pope, he created and constructed a document, a papal bull, and it is now called the Doctrine of Discovery. And in that document, they wrote that anyone that is not Christian, it was lawful to vanquish, enslave, and kill. And they did. When John Cabot landed in the east, where the Mi'kmaq are, he did something, a symbolic Christian act. He took a sword, and it's shaped like a cross. He took that sword because he was directed by the Pope and the monarch of that era in 1497. He took that sword, and when he landed on the land, he did the first Christian act. He did a chant. Took that sword, buried it deep into the ground, and he did that chant, and he baptized the lands. He baptized the lands for his sovereign. And I'm going to use some legal language. When he did that, it crystallized the title for their sovereign. And that's the underlying title of the crown that we hear all over the court cases. That's what that is. It's just a construct. It's like if I went to you and said, I have fairy dust in my hand. You can't see it, but I have fairy dust, and you got to believe me, it's fairy dust. But I have it, and it has control over you. That's what the Doctrine of Discovery is. It's fairy dust, constructed from the minds of men in that era. And it's folding out into the laws, into the courts, into the policies that we see today. Tapoy.